What about abortion in cases of rape? That's a very common question that people with a pro-life perspective get asked. And I was asked it by a friend a few days ago, asking what the Scottish Family Party's position was on the matter. So I thought this is probably something that quite a few people will be interested in hearing about. So I said I'll make a video answering your question, and here it is. Now, to talk about abortion in the case of rape, I think it's important that we start at the beginning. If we go straight to the hard case, then we'll probably, well, it might reveal that we've actually got disagreements on some points much earlier in the argument. So I'm going to start from the beginning and then work up to the case of abortion in the case of rape. Now, I'm going to start off with thinking about the question, what are you worth? What's someone worth? Now, I really hate that phrase because it's normally taken to mean that if you say, what's so-and-so worth, the answer is normally, $6.2 billion or whatever. But no, if you want to know what someone's worth, you don't need to look what's in their bank account. You just need to see there's a person, and the answer is really easy because it's the same for everyone. What's a certain person worth? Well, the answer is one human life. Doesn't matter what sex, race, age, what abilities they've got. Doesn't matter whether it's Elon Musk or a drug addict lying in the street in Glasgow. The value of their life, what are they worth? One human life. Now, that's part of my set of beliefs as a Christian, but I imagine most people would agree with that principle as well. Now, that's not to say that all lives are equally noble or equally useful or equally admirable, but when it comes to worth, they're all the same. And I think that's a really important corrective, because some people might at times be tempted to feel that they're more important, their life's more valuable than certain other people. And there might be some people who might think that they don't really matter, their life's not so valuable. So it's a really important corrective and a really important principle of humanity that the value of every human is one human life. And in the light of that, I believe, and I think I'm probably quite safe in saying we believe, that killing is wrong. So taking away the life of a human is wrong. Now, why is it wrong? There's two aspects we need to think about here, and I'm going to separate them. Normally we think about them together, but I think in this case we need to separate them just to be very clear. Right, if you hear about someone being, kidnapped, raped, tortured and murdered, okay, you'll think about that, and you'll think about the terror and the pain and the suffering, and you'll also think about the sense of bereavement that the family will be experiencing, and you will think that is an appalling crime that's being committed for those reasons, and that is absolutely right, obviously. But then there's another wrong as well, and the wrong is the killing, the taking of the life. Now, the taking of life, that's not to do with the emotions anyone experiences. Even if a life is taken without any pain and suffering, even if there's no one feeling bereaved, that there's no one mourning that death, it's still wrong. It's still a serious wrong, and it is a tragedy. Now, I think in our age, the focus tends to be, we're in quite a sentimental age, I would say, the focus would tend to be on the terror, the pain, the suffering, the bereavement, the emotional and experiential factors, which are very, obviously, hugely important. But we need to remember as well, there's the objective factor as well, that a life has been ended. And that is tragic in and of itself. Now, normally when we're looking at human life, we say killing's wrong. Well, there are exceptions to that. We normally think that killing is acceptable to save lives, to protect people, to protect from evils, to prevent evils, like, dictatorships invading your country. But we normally delegate the right to kill in these situations to the armed forces and to the police in some circumstances. Now, some people believe that the death penalty is justified. In other words, someone's own behaviour can justify taking their life. We don't need to talk about that issue. But that's another exception that some people believe in. And so it's pretty universal that people accept that human life has value after birth. Once people are born, then their life is of this huge, huge value. Now, obviously, the question relevant to us is, does that value actually begin before birth? And when I'm talking about this, I'll try not to use the word it to describe the unborn child, because he or she is most appropriate. Often people don't do that, but I will try to do that. He or she. So does the unborn child have the right to life? Can they be killed? Now, a lot of people think yes, because they think for one reason or another the unborn child doesn't merit the same valuing and protection as the child outside the womb. So let's look at some of the arguments. I've got the Scottish Family Party's leaflet about abortion here, which I think just goes through some of these very basic arguments, and I would say refutes them. So what's different about an unborn child compared to human life outside the womb? Well, some people might say, well, the life in the womb, it's so small, it's tiny, it's only this big, it's only that big. They're arguments people make. Does the value of a human life really depend on how big it is, physical size? Is a big burly bloke more valuable than a slight woman? No. I mean, is an adult more valuable than an infant because they're bigger? No. Does size have anything to do with the value of a human life? No, it doesn't. You'll hear people say as well, if you look at the unborn child at such and such a number of weeks gestation, it doesn't look like a baby. It doesn't look very human. I mean, really? Can we really judge the value of a life by what it looks like? So if we're dealing with an adult, if an adult has some terrible deformity and therefore basically look less like a human, if you like, does that mean that their life's less valuable? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Another common argument put forward, it's inside the mother. It's still inside someone else's body, so it doesn't have value. It's okay to kill the unborn child because it's inside the mother. I mean, really, can the value of a human being depend on where it is? So when the baby's travelled along the birth canal into the outside world, at that instant, it becomes hugely valuable, and to kill it would be a monstrous crime. And yet a few minutes and a few centimetres before, the life had no value. How can that make sense? Well, I think it just doesn't make sense. Another argument people put forward, an unborn child at that many weeks gestation, they couldn't survive on their own outside their womb. They're reliant. They're not self-sufficient. Well, is that the way it really works? So when an adult, if they become dependent on another person or on other people, does their life become less valuable? Well, no. So we think the opposite. And we think we've got a special responsibility to care for those who can't look after themselves, those who are reliant on other people. I mean, the unborn child isn't conscious. Some people say that. Well, okay, what about when you're not conscious, like when you're asleep? Is it okay to kill you while you're asleep? Maybe people say, yeah, but I'm going to wake up though. And the unborn child is going to gain consciousness as well in the future. But there's also a significant discussion to be had about to what extent a child is conscious just after birth. Because newborns, their cognitive functioning is very limited, very limited. And some people do argue that after birth a baby is not conscious, therefore it's okay to kill it. There are lots of academics in universities who are arguing the case on the basis of these sort of arguments that it's okay to kill children up to 6 months old or up to 1 year old if the parents decide they don't want them, for example. Anyway, the next argument, I mean, he can't do anything. The unborn child's got no capabilities. They're not intelligent. They can't perform any acts. And is that really how it works? The more intelligent you are, the more valuable you are. The more things you can do, the better you are at doing things, the more valuable your life. No, it's not the way it works. She's not wanted. If a child's not wanted, then their life doesn't have value. It's okay to dispose of that life. Do we think that for people after they're born? If a child's born and then the parents or the mother decides, oh, I've changed my mind, I don't actually want a child after all, does that mean their life becomes less valuable? Does that mean it's okay to dispense with that life? Certainly not. If a life's not wanted, if a person's not wanted for any reason, that's a reason for society to try and gather round and make them wanted, make them feel wanted, and to give them the support and the context they need to flourish. So that's some principles there. I would just add another one as well. Sometimes we'll hear people come out with the argument, he's not fully developed. He's only at a stage of development, but it's not fully developed into a human. But right from conception, we're dealing with something that is alive and is growing, and he or she has their DNA that's going to blossom into their adult life in years to come. I think what an interesting illustration of this is people say, obviously, when your heart stops beating, then you're dead. But within the womb, when your heart starts beating, is that not surely a sign of life? I would argue that it is. Now, with those arguments, then there was 8 arguments I put forward there, and I think that I've refuted each of them. But what tends to happen in discussion with people is people think, right, the unborn life is less valuable, and they might put forward one of those arguments, and then it might be refuted. It might explain what's wrong with this, and the person thinks, okay, yeah, that argument wasn't so good after all, was it? I'll forget that one. But I've still got 7 more arguments. So, okay, let's go to the next one. So you deal with the next argument, and the person might think, yeah, that argument's not very good either. I can't really argue about that anymore. I don't think that one works. But I've still got another 7. You want to say, no, you haven't got another 7. You've got another 6 now, because that's 2 down. Then you go to the next one, talk about the next argument, and the person might think, okay, this one, it doesn't really work either, but I've still got another 7. You get the idea. There's sort of whack-a-mole idea that it's quite difficult for people to change their view on this sometimes, because they've got an array of arguments, and you can't argue with 8 things all at once. You can only deal with them one at a time. So people have to take a step back and they say, actually, I've been through all the arguments I've got and none of them work. Therefore, I need to acknowledge that the unborn life is valuable. So I believe that new life in the womb is as valuable and precious as any other human life, and as worthy of protection, and as equally bad to bring that life to an end deliberately. Now, when we're talking about the case of rape, some people might be thinking at this point, if I agree with him here, I'm worried I'm going to be in trouble when we come to the case of rape. But I would encourage you not to do that. If you accepted the conclusion so far, well, follow your thinking where it leads, and then, consider it when we've got to the end of the argument. So, let's say abortion, I think, is the taking of a precious, innocent human life. Now, I said earlier on that to take life, there are sometimes justifications that we accept to take life. Now, let's think what those justifications are. To save life, to protect from evil, to prevent evil. And some people might say because the person deserved it, that they deserved to be killed or to die. Now, in the case of abortion, I think obviously those conditions are not met by motivations such as convenience. I want to finish my course. I don't want to be a single mother. I just don't want to bring up a child just now. I don't want to be pregnant. I don't want to look like that. It's not the right time for me. So if you think about scales, if we're weighing up the value of one precious human life against, convenience, this is not what I want to do at this stage of life. I mean, really, those factors, those personal factors, do not outweigh one human life. Not even close. So the usual sort of abortions for what are called social reasons, then I think they're morally unacceptable. Right, how about abortions in the case to save the life of the mother? Now, some medics say that actually this situation never actually arises, but let's imagine it did. And then in that case, if you think about the scales, what are you weighing in the scales? The life of the mother, the life of the unborn child. There's a decision to make. Right, in that case, the scales can balance. So abortion, tragically, very upsetting, very difficult decision, but it could be justified in those situations. Right, let's come on to rape now. Let's get on to the crux of the matter. Obviously, I don't need to say how terrible a crime rape is. And when rapists are convicted, they'll be glad they had the current government rather than the Scottish Family Party in charge, because their punishment will probably be significantly more severe if the Scottish Family Party ran the justice system. But let's say we're talking about a case where rape has happened and the woman's become pregnant. And that's relatively rare, but it does happen. It does happen. We cannot dismiss that possibility, certainly not. So a new life has been created within the victim, and that's an element of the crime. That's one of the many reasons why rape is such a serious crime, because it introduces the possibility of creating new life within a woman without her consent, and that's a big part of the seriousness of the offence. Now, if we think about this unborn child, well, let's state something obvious. They're obviously not guilty. The rapist is guilty, but the unborn child is not. They bear no moral responsibilities. Right, if the life of the unborn child is ended, does that protect against an evil? Well, I would argue not, because the evil's already happened, the terrible things already happened, and that can't be undone or prevented by ending the life of the unborn child. Right, would it save a life to end the life of the unborn child? Well, I would argue in the vast majority of cases, no, it wouldn't do that. Some people, some women in that situation might feel it would improve their life. It might be what they would prefer. They might feel that is what would be helpful for them. But would it save a life? So when we've got the balances here, a human life, are these factors, these preferences, do they outweigh the human life? I would suggest that they don't. Now, I can imagine a situation, I don't know if this has ever happened, I can imagine a situation where, let's say, a girl's been raped and she was so traumatized and psychologically damaged that she is like determinedly suicidal and just wants to be rid of the pregnancy in that situation. So it is genuinely a risk to the mother's life because of basically mental scarring, mental illness induced by the rape. Let's think about it that way. In that case, might abortion be justified? I would say possibly it would be. If that was a genuine psychological condition that she was in, then yes, I think abortion could be justified to save the life of the mother. But you see what I've always come back to? I always come back to the idea of the scales. On one side, we've got one precious human life. Now, on the other side, what are we going to put there? And I think the only thing that really starts balancing things up is when you put in another human life on the other side of it. Now, if we think about a baby born of rape, are they less valuable when they're born? Let's say a woman gets raped, she has the baby, and the baby is born, growing up through life. Is their life less valuable than anyone else's? Obviously not. If someone said to them, you're nothing, you were conceived in rape, we would be horrified, wouldn't we? We'd say, how dare you say that? How dare you speak to a person like that and suggest their life's less valuable just because they were conceived in rape? That would be an appalling thing to say. It would be an appalling attitude to have. But then if we think about that same child before birth, should we allow the same attitude before birth? I would suggest not. I think the life is equally valuable before and after birth. Similarly, if a baby who was conceived in rape were to be born and then someone was subsequently to kill them, then that would be no less serious than any other murder. Similarly, before birth, if someone were to end that unborn child's life, again, I think it's no less serious an issue for that to happen. Now, you can find on YouTube several testimonies of children who were conceived in rape who speak about the value of their own life. They're glad they're there. They realise that the way they came into being was all wrong, but their life is a positive thing and they're living it in all its fullness. And I think that they're great stories to hear. Now, looking at this situation again, if we look at the rape situation, the woman is a victim of a terrible crime, and we can obviously empathise with that. So I said in our society tends to focus on the emotional side of things, so we can all sympathise, empathise, and appreciate the trauma that a woman who's been a victim of such a crime has experienced and will experience probably on an ongoing basis as they come to terms with that through the rest of their life. But then when we think about the unborn child, now how can we empathise with them? We don't see any tears. We don't hear about their emotional state, but we have to remember the other factor here is that it just is a fact that ending a human life is wrong. It's a tragedy. It's a terrible thing to do. It's a huge loss. And that's regardless of any emotional considerations, it's just wrong. It's something that we shouldn't do. But just one last thing to say here. If we're talking about ending a human life, killing, basically, if we're talking about that, then we really need to be sure about that, don't we? The illustration that sometimes I think of in my head, if you imagine that someone's doing a magic trick, these things where you stick a sword through a cabinet and your beautiful assistant might be in it or not. Now, if you think, I don't think she's in there, so I'll stick the sword through. People say, well, hang on, that's not good enough. You can't do that saying you don't think so. You've got to be absolutely certain that there's no one in that cabinet before you stick the sword through. So say you're looking at this issue. If we're talking about the value of human life, is it okay to end the human life within the womb? if a person was saying, I think it's only about 12 weeks, I think that's about when it's going to be, I would say, well, I sort of think that's not good enough. That's not good enough. If we're looking at killing, you need to be absolutely certain that what you're doing is not amounting to killing a human, because that is such a weighty matter that uncertainty can just have no place in it at all. Right, a couple more things to add in the case of victims of rape who become pregnant. I mean, some women who've been raped, obviously they'll go through the pregnancy, have the child, and give the child for adoption. There are currently couples queuing up to adopt newborn children. So there are families ready and waiting to take any child that's born. Now, another very important factor as well is women who've been raped and become pregnant. They often face the decision, what am I going to do? Am I going to have an abortion? Am I going to have the child? And there are a lot of stories and a lot of research that indicate that having the child is actually the better route in terms of recovery and healing and moving on with the rest of life. Even for women who might not feel that seemed the best thing at the time, women who do go down that route, it often seems to work out for the best. So the idea that abortion is a sort of treatment for women who become pregnant when they're raped, it helps them to get over the experience. Well, I think the evidence indicates that that isn't the case in many, or even most cases. And I think that's a really important point. Now, I was asked about the Scottish Family Party's policy, so I'm just going to read some of it. I'll put it in context. I won't just read the little bit about rape. I'll read it more widely. So here we go. Life is precious. All human life has intrinsic worth, and the measure of a civilized society is how we treat those who are most vulnerable. Okay, that would be a tick from everyone, I would imagine. We affirm the value of human life in the womb. Abortion as a means of birth control is morally unjustifiable. Ultimately, we would like to see the law reflect the universal value of human life, but immediate steps could include offering independent counselling to those considering abortion, reducing the current 24-week limit for abortions, and preventing abortion on grounds of disability after 24 weeks. In other words, if the Scottish Family Party had a few MSPs in the Parliament, these would be the sort of the bills we'd try to put forward. Let's reduce the time limit. Let's stop abortion up to full term in the case of disability. They're the sort of things we would try to do if we could get someone from other parties to join in. You need representatives from two parties. Right, carry on with our policy. We would invest in support for women facing unwanted or unexpected pregnancy, helping them to establish a strong network of support and encouraging alternatives such as fostering or adoption. Funding pregnancy support services would be one way to do this. Again, that's a great policy. I mean, currently there are campaigners who are attacking crisis pregnancy centres where they try and help women who might otherwise have considered abortion, might help them to overcome the reasons that were leading them to think abortion was the best option. And these organisations are demonised in Scotland, which is just turning things on its head. Right, carry on. Those who currently don't have a strong view about abortion might still agree that this important topic should be discussed openly as a party political issue. Currently, no party in the Scottish Parliament is willing to stand up to the pro-abortion consensus. Now, some people like the idea that, it's not a party political issue, it's a conscience issue. Well, really, not for all the parties in the Scottish Parliament it isn't. Their policy is pro-abortion. It's as simple as that. It is a matter of party politics. So the idea that it's somehow not part of party politics, I just don't get it. It's just not true. It is their policies. Right, moving on to the most relevant section here. Even in cases such as rape and incest, the new life is valuable. A child conceived in rape is of equal value to any other child, both before and after they're born. While rape is obviously a heinous crime and a traumatic ordeal for the victim, the evidence does not suggest that abortion alleviates the pain. Where the mother's life is endangered by continuing the pregnancy, abortion can be justified as a difficult decision weighing the value of the life of the mother. However, while pro-abortion campaigners like to focus on these rare cases, our immediate focus is on abortions for the usual social reasons. So to answer our question, what's our policy on abortion in the case of rape? Well, what we're saying here is this is not something we're seeking to address at the moment. This is not something where we're proposing a policy. Our priority, our policy, is to deal with the 99% of abortions. That's where our focus is at the moment. Right, the Greens, Labour and Lib Dems in Scotland are pushing for the full decriminalisation of abortion. This entails abortion on demand up to full term. The SNP government funds organisations that campaign for this as well. The Conservatives have no policy, but they're certainly not a pro-life party, and votes for them will not defend the lives of the unborn. We urge voters to recognise the ethical gravity of the issue. The fact is that a vote for any party that is not pro-life amounts to an endorsement of the killing of unborn children. So pretty straight talking there, but we feel that's what it needs. We really want to challenge people to think about that and hopefully recognise the importance of this issue. So that's clarified the Scottish Family Party's policy as well. In any case, the Scottish Family Party with the case of abortion, I mean, let's say our dreams are fulfilled, our ambitions come to fruition, then in maybe 10 years' time, we'll have a decent gaggle of MSPs in the Scottish Parliament, and we'll be able to get some issues debated in the Parliament, which might start to shift public opinion. But that would be, bringing down the 24-week limit, stopping abortion up to full term in cases of disability. So we'll be focused on saving the 16,000 lives a year. And when we've done that, and we're talking like probably decades in the future, then let's have a look at the really difficult cases and how we could address those. So I hope that was helpful. I hope that was interesting. If anyone would like to discuss the issue on our live stream, drop an email to contact@scottishfamily.org. We're keen to get people onto the live stream to discuss some of these issues. We would be very happy to see you there and to have a chat about this. And do get your tickets to our conference, 11th of November in central Glasgow, just in the afternoon. £10, non-members welcome. We would love to see you there. Ticket link below. Thanks for watching.